Welcome to our Ph.D. webinar on outline templates. In this webinar, we're going to talk about how you can develop your own outline formats or templates by reviewing the literature that you are reading and understanding that while there are common formats that we follow, there is no one way to develop or outline for the scientific and academic writing that you are going to do. When we develop our outline templates, a good starting point is to review literature that we find is actually useful for us in the type of research that we're doing. And to do this, it's really helpful that we understand what our purpose is for writing, but as a reader, that we understand the purpose of what the authors are trying to communicate in their writing. A good way to understand purpose is to try to think about, are we or the authors that we're reading presenting a problem that is trying to be solved through the research? Or is there a puzzle that's being pieced together through the scientific writing to produce a clearer picture and better understanding? Or is there an identified gap in our knowledge that is going to attempt to be filled? Understanding these purposes in both what you read and what you are trying to write is a really great starting point to help you develop an outline and an outline template. And outlines act as blueprints for our writing, the same way that you would use a blueprint to build some kind of a building. Blueprints indicate the relationship between different rooms and different parts, the approximate sizes of things, their placement, and it provides more or less an overview of how we can structure what it is that we are trying to build. And while a blueprint may be rather straightforward and quite simple, it does allow us a lot of flexibility and variety in what we can build with it. For example, we would expect that an outline or a blueprint for a football stadium is going to be a lot different than a blueprint for a fortress or a castle. Now, realistically, the blueprint serves the same purpose, but it produces different outcomes. And when it comes to scientific writing, we're very fortunate that we have the IMRaD format to go off of. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, you'd probably recognize this in a lot of the scientific articles that you are reading. IMRaD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. And the IMRaD provides a really good skeletal structure for us to build our scientific writing around, but it's like a recipe for bread. It gives us the basic ingredients that we should have, but we are free to add and change different ingredients in that recipe to make it more suitable for what it is that we're trying to do. And that's how we can build these outline templates, by looking over other articles that we are reading, because the majority of them are very likely going to follow some kind of an IMRaD structure or a modified IMRaD format. And IMRaD is really great because it allows us to conduct objective research in order to answer specific questions, and it's typically used when we are doing forms of primary research or very specific forms of secondary research, such as literature reviews and meta-analyses. The goal is to really give a format that presents our facts objectively, relying on collected data and previous research to help form the claim that we are making. But there are these different nuances and adjustments that can be made across individual documents to this IMRaD format. So it provides a good foundational structure for research papers to follow, but it is not rigid. And we can see how other researchers have modified this IMRaD structure when we look at real published literature. So for example, if we take this article here, which is a typical empirical research type of article, well, all that we need to do is go through and look at how it's constructed based off of its headings, like the introduction, and any subheadings that appear under these different sections. So we start with an introduction, we move into, in this specific article example, it has materials and methods with all of these different subheadings below it. Then we have something that doesn't quite fit into the IMRaD structure, but then we have our results with a variety of subheadings, then we have a discussion, and then we have a conclusion. So how is it that this article's overview by looking at its headings and subheadings, how does it conform to the IMRaD while modifying it at the same time? Well, we can look at all of those ideas presented on the left compared to the IMRaD structure as presented here on the right. And we can see we have a clear introduction, we have materials and methods, and this third section is also really a part of the methods probably added to provide additional background for us to be able to properly understand the results that are going to be presented next. And the discussion ends up following, and of course, we always have a conclusion or a summary, which is part of the end of the IMRaD structure, even though it's not embedded in the name. But we can take this same IMRaD idea and modify it for something like a clinical report as presented in this article here. Now, we've also taken the time to go through and give you the idea of why you might want to write a clinical report to kind of demonstrate how it's a bit different than an empirical type of article. Realistically, we use this sort of format to report detailed symptoms, signs, diagnoses of treatments, follow-up of individual patients or a group of patients. It's often used to report on cases that are unusual or novel, and it's really kind of a cornerstone of medical research and progress. Some of these reports may contain a very extensive literature review on the topic, but often the whole report is quite short relative to the more basic empirical research article. So let's look at a format based off of all of what a clinical report is attempting to do. They'll typically start out with an abstract, moving towards an introduction. There might be a literature review that is required. It's then followed by a case study, in which case we can have a lot of different subheadings embedded underneath this, which provide the context and the background about the case, and then a discussion and a conclusion, or perhaps it's called a summary in some cases. This provides us with a fairly similar skeletal structure to the IMRaD, where the introduction exists, the discussion and the conclusion exist, but the literature review and the case study often act as the materials, methods, and then the case goes through and also provides results, which you can see results of pathological tests or other investigations on the case. So we have all of the elements of IMRaD here just presented in a slightly different format. So in the example from a few slides ago, the postnatal glucose homeostasis in late preterm and term infants clinical report, these are the headings that we find in that article, in which case we can see that the addition of a background is really just the literature review. We're just modifying the name. This section here is the case, and they've merged the discussion section together within that. And from this same clinical report, the summary is the conclusion. So we're following a very similar recipe, but we are changing it a little bit to fit how we're trying to produce this clinical report if we were the authors of the postnatal glucose homeostasis article. And of course, in the social sciences, we apply a fairly similar structure as well. In the case of this article, we have an introduction. We then move into something called territory as a necessary concept in agroecology as a main heading, in which case we have a bunch of subheadings underneath that, followed by the heading diversity of transition dynamics in territories, ending with a conclusion. So how does this conform to the IMRaD structure? Well, let's go and break all of this apart. Here, we can really see that the introduction and the background is sort of being merged together. You can think of the second heading as kind of a really big background providing purpose to what this article is supposed to be about, and all of these subheadings, when we analyzed it, really provides a theoretical framework consisting of important concepts, or we could consider those to be the methods or materials. Each of these are also discussed, and each of these subheadings contains a literature review, which is really quite a common approach in the social sciences. The final two headings are really the bulk of the discussion, followed by the conclusion in this article. So we're not that far off from the IMRaD structure. And the great thing about using this sort of approach is that you can create your own outline templates from the articles that you're reading, specifically from the articles that you think are valuable to you. There's no one way to create an outline for writing, so it's important that you try to find what will be useful for you. We really recommend that by creating these outline templates, you'll have a much better start to your outlining process. And it's a very simple process. Look over some of the articles that you have found fascinating that fit the type of article format that you are trying to produce, and create a list of the headings and subheadings in chronological or sequential order from that article. Try then to determine how these headings and subheadings are conforming to the IMRaD structure while also adapting or modifying that IMRaD structure. See how you can identify what they add or what they change and how it would fit under the introduction, methods, results, discussion. And then you can use this structure to help you understand how you can generate your own outline template for your own writing. And then in addition, we can also create a reverse outline to better understand how the article is constructed at a paragraph and section level. In order to produce a reverse outline, it's actually quite easy. Now we have our headings and subheadings to create an outline template. We just need to read the first and last sentence of every paragraph. And for each of those sentences we read, we want to highlight the core concepts. We can write these core concepts down on a piece of paper or on our computer. And then we want to try to analyze these different sentences to look for a logical structure, transitions, and flow between the ideas from heading and subheading to the next paragraph into new sections. So an example of how we can create a reverse outline would be like this, from the non-structural carbohydrates in oat forage article presented here. What's also great about reverse outlines as part of an outline template is we can make notes on other aspects of construction. For example, in the case here, the first paragraph is actually only 2 sentences, so we might want to, in our own writing, have a more expansive first paragraph that is more than just 2 sentences. But the reverse outline for the first paragraph would look something like this. Then we can read the second paragraph, and the first and last sentences provide us something like this. The third paragraph provides us with something like this. Remember, we're just reading the first and last paragraphs here to create our reverse outline. But if you read through all of the third paragraph, we'd actually notice that the topic sentence, food with these high NSC concentrations should be rationed to laminitis horses or ponies, this isn't really the topic of what the rest of the paragraph is about. And this is why reverse paragraphs are quite useful for us, especially in our own writing after we've produced a first draft. We can construct our own reverse outline to see if we are following principles of cohesion and logical construction of our paragraphs to create good sense of flow from idea to idea. And here's an example of what a reverse outline for the fourth paragraph would look like. Using these reverse outlines is a good way to get a quick overview, not just of how IMRaD is being applied, adapted, or modified, but also the main ideas and how they are being presented and connected from paragraph to paragraph, section to section. So we hope that you found this useful. If you would like to learn more about ideas of cohesion or more about reverse outlines, there's a lot of really great information available here on our YouTube channel, but also by doing an internet search on something like reverse outlines. There are a lot of great other resources provided to you from other writing centers around the world. We hope that you found this helpful, and we're looking forward to seeing you all in the next PhD webinar.